Tonight we stand upon a river bank where the mud is black, the air is salted with coal smoke and brine, and the morning tide moves with the slow indifference of judgment itself. London is scarcely awake, yet already a crowd has begun to gather at Wapping, pressed along the waterfront beneath a low grey sky. Boatmen rest upon their oars, merchants peer from windows, apprentices climb walls for a clearer view. Somewhere behind the mass of watching faces, a bell has sounded. Somewhere nearby, a condemned sailor is approaching the last shore he will ever see. This is Execution Dock, the grim threshold of maritime justice on the River Thames. For centuries, this stretch of tidal ground was remembered as the place where those accused of crimes upon the sea came to die. The condemned were not brought here by chance. The scaffold stood beside the river because the river was the symbol of their offence, the highway by which they had sailed beyond ordinary law, seized vessels, plundered cargoes, shed blood, or defied the authority of the Crown. Here, at the moving edge of land and water, the Admiralty claimed them once again. The surviving evidence is chillingly precise. Records held by the National Archives preserve the workings of the High Court of Admiralty, whose authority over piracy had been strengthened by parliamentary law in the 16th century. Royal Museums. Greenwich has traced the history of Execution Dock as a public killing ground used until the year 1830. Printed trial accounts, prison sermons, execution reports, court depositions, and the faded ink of official warrants allow historians to reconstruct a world in which a sailor might cross an ocean, survive cannon fire and fever, endure hunger and storm, only to perish at the end of a rope before a watching multitude. And yet, for all that survives on paper, the deepest human reality can only be approached in imagination. Picture the prisoner in the final hours before dawn. He has spent the night within stone walls, perhaps in Newgate Prison, where darkness is disturbed by chains, coughing, whispered prayers, and the knowledge that morning will not bring release. His life has narrowed to small sensations. The scrape of a key in a lock, the smell of damp straw, the cold touch of iron at the wrist, the murmured words of a chaplain asking whether his soul is prepared, the distant sound of London stirring beyond the prison walls, a city already hungry for spectacle. He may once have been a fisherman, a deckhand, a naval deserter, or a labourer driven towards the sea by poverty. He may have climbed the rigging in tropical rain, tasted oranges taken from captured holds, slept beneath stars bright enough to make the ocean seem holy. Perhaps he had once believed that a pirate life offered escape from hunger, cruel captains, flogging, and the endless discipline of merchant service. Perhaps he had believed that upon the open sea, a man might briefly govern himself. Now the sea has returned to claim him in a different manner. The procession towards the dock is deliberate. Justice in this age is not merely administered, it is displayed. The condemned passes through streets where thousands may look upon him, some silent, some jeering, some uneasy. Officials accompany him, bearing signs of Admiralty authority. The law wishes to be seen. It wishes the river labourer, the merchant captain, the restless sailor, and the frightened child perched upon a parent's shoulders to understand that piracy ends not in golden treasure, nor in distant freedom, but in humiliation beside the tide. At the waterfront, the river breathes heavily against the steps. The scaffold waits without motion. It is wood, rope, and official purpose. Above it turn the cries of gulls. Below it flows the Thames, carrying barges, broken reeds, floating refuse, and the wealth of an empire increasingly dependent upon safe shipping, sugar, tobacco, cloth, coin, timber, spices, weapons, and human lives move through this watery artery. Pirates did not merely rob individual ships. In the eyes of government and merchants, they threatened the circulation of wealth upon which cities, colonies, and naval power depended. This is one answer to the question haunting our story. So why was justice so swift? Because the sea was vast, and authority upon it was fragile. A pirate ship could vanish beyond the horizon. A stolen vessel might change its name, alter its sails, and reappear among islands or distant coasts. Witnesses could die of disease. Captured crews were costly to guard. Rumours of successful piracy could spread through harbours faster than official proclamations, awakening dangerous thoughts in men whose lives were hard, poorly paid, and brutally disciplined. A delayed punishment risked becoming a forgotten punishment. A public execution, carried out swiftly and visibly, spoke with terrible clarity, yet we should be cautious before seeing only villains upon the scaffold and righteous men below it. The oceanic world of the 17th and 18th centuries was harsh beyond our easy imagining. Legitimate ships could be places of hunger, violence, unpaid wages, impressment, sickness, and arbitrary command. Governments themselves issued permissions for violence in wartime, encouraging private vessels to seize enemy property, then condemning similar acts when political winds changed. The boundary between hero, private raider, mutineer, smuggler, and pirate could be clear in law, yet confused in memory and experience. The man beneath the rope may have committed dreadful crimes. He may also have been shaped by a dreadful world. As the executioner approaches, the crowd quietens. A prayer may be spoken. A final statement may be attempted, swallowed by river wind and the restless movement of spectators. The condemned looks outward, perhaps towards masts rocking upon the water, perhaps towards nothing at all. He has sailed across distances most people on shore will never see. He has witnessed reefs, ports, storms, violence, and the broad, terrifying beauty of the open ocean. Yet his final horizon is a wooden beam raised above tidal mud. The rope is placed around his neck. In this moment, justice is no longer a statute, a seal, or a court record. It is a body breathing its last breaths while a city watches. It is the transformation of a living sailor into an example. It is authority announcing that no matter how distant the ocean, no matter how lawless the deck, no matter how proudly a pirate flag may rise upon the wind, the river leads back to London. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. We possess the warrants and the printed accounts, but rarely the true thoughts of the condemned. Did they repent? Did they rage? Did they believe themselves betrayed? Did some stare upon the river and remember a childhood shore, a mother's voice, or the first ship they had ever seen moving towards the sea? These questions remain answerless, adrift to ponder. Tonight, as the tide slides past the vanished scaffold of Execution Dock, we begin not with legend, but with the brutal fact of death made public. Pirate justice was swift because fear demanded speed, commerce demanded protection, and power demanded a spectacle no sailor could easily forget. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the river darkens and our voyage begins, share where in the world you are listening from, and what the local time is where you are tonight. Before a sailor became an outlaw, he was usually something far less romantic. He was a boy carrying sacks along a rain-soaked quay. He was an orphan sleeping near warehouses where rats searched among spilled grain. He was a fisherman's son watching ships return from distant waters, their hulls stained with weed and their crews speaking of islands perfumed with sugar, harbours bright with silver, and storms that could swallow a man without leaving so much as a shoe upon the waves. The sea drew men because the land had little to offer them. In the ports of England, Scotland, Ireland, the American colonies, and the crowded islands of the Caribbean, maritime labour promised wages, food, and movement in a world where poverty often seemed fixed from birth. A young man might sign aboard a merchant vessel carrying timber, tobacco, salted fish, cloth, or sugar. He might enter naval service and discover a floating kingdom of command, punishment, and ceaseless work. He might join a private raiding ship during wartime, legally encouraged to attack the vessels of an enemy ruler. Each path began with hope, Each could lead towards ruin. Life aboard an ordinary vessel was a discipline of exhaustion. At dawn, bare feet moved across wet planks hardened by salt. Hands hauled rope until the skin split and thickened. Men climbed rigging in darkness, while sails cracked in fierce wind above a black and heaving ocean. Meals were often coarse biscuits, salted meat, dried peas, and water that slowly soured in its cask. Illness moved easily through cramped quarters. Teeth loosened, wounds festered, fever burned through sleeping decks where there was little air and less mercy. A captain stood above this struggling world with immense authority. At sea, distance protected him. No magistrate watched when he reduced rations, withheld pay, beat a sailor, or ordered a punishment for disobedience. The lash fell before assembled crewmates, each stroke making clear that the ship was not a fellowship, but a hierarchy. Some captains were respected and competent. Others ruled through terror. Upon an ocean without witnesses, cruelty could grow unchecked. It is here that the pirate story begins, not with buried treasure, but with labour, resentment, and hunger. There was also another class of seafarer, one whose work seemed dangerously close to piracy, even while bearing the authority of kings and governments. He was the privateer. During war, rulers issued written commissions known as letters of marque. These documents permitted privately owned vessels to seize the ships and cargoes of an enemy. A privateer crew might chase a laden merchant vessel across the Caribbean, fire cannon into its rigging, force it to surrender, and carry away its wealth. If the target belonged to the correct enemy, the violence was lawful. If not, the same act could be condemned as piracy. The distinction could rest upon parchment, timing, and politics. A sailor serving aboard a privateer learned the arts of attack. He learned how to approach an unwilling ship, how to judge its guns, how to disable its sails, how to board through smoke and splintered wood, how to search holds for profitable cargo, and how to divide a captured prize. War-trained men in plunder. Governments gave them permission to taste sudden wealth. Then, when peace arrived, the permission vanished. The cannon remained, the ships remained, the hunger remained. At the end of a war, thousands of experienced seamen could find themselves dismissed into ports already full of unemployed men. Wages declined. Merchant captains offered hard voyages for miserable pay. Some sailors, accustomed to the possibility of prize money, refused to return to lives of submission and scarcity. The enemy flag no longer mattered so much as the value hidden below deck. A ship heavy with goods might appear not as an innocent vessel, but as a floating answer to poverty. The descent into piracy was not always sudden. Sometimes it began with a dispute over wages. A crew, cheated of money promised at the beginning of a voyage, took control of its vessel. Sometimes sailors mutinied against a brutal captain, leaving him in a boat or casting him upon an empty shore. Sometimes men captured by pirates were offered a choice between joining the crew and facing the uncertainty of abandonment. Sometimes a vessel sailing under legal authority continued taking prizes long after its commission had lost all force. A line had been crossed, but it was a line drawn upon moving water. Among the islands of the Caribbean, another violent tradition had taken root. Hunters, deserters, escaped labourers, adventurers, and men cast out from orderly life gathered along coasts where European empires struggled to control their distant possessions. Some hunted wild cattle and cured strips of meat over fires. Some began raiding Spanish settlements and small vessels. They were known as buccaneers, and their lives existed in the uneasy borderland between tolerated raiders and condemned criminals. When their attacks weakened a rival empire, colonial governors might look away. When their raids caused embarrassment, diplomatic anger, or lost a merchants under protection, the same authorities could denounce them. A man praised as useful during one season could be hunted as an outlaw in another. Empire did not always despise piracy at first sight. At times, empire quietly benefited from violence it later pretended had been monstrous from the beginning. The sailor understood this contradiction. He saw rich men profit from cargoes carried through dangerous waters. He saw governments celebrate raiding when it enriched the proper treasury. He saw merchants insure their goods and captains guard their privileges while ordinary seamen were paid late, beaten swiftly, and buried at sea without ceremony. None of this made piracy innocent. Captured passengers could be terrified, injured, robbed, or killed. Merchant crews suffered greatly beneath armed raiders. Coastal communities feared sails upon the horizon for good reason, yet the pirate ship could seem, to a desperate sailor, like a rough rebellion against a merciless order. Some pirate crews elected captains, some agreed upon rules for sharing plunder, some arranged payments for men who lost limbs in battle. A captain who showed cowardice, concealed treasure, or abused the crew might be removed. These customs were not a gentle democracy, nor were they free from violence, intimidation, or greed. But to a sailor who had known only obedience and the lash, they offered a startling promise. A man might possess a voice. A man might share in the wealth his labour had seized. A man might eat from provisions once reserved for officers. That promise, however brief, was powerful enough to draw men towards the pirate deck. Night falls upon a harbour crowded with anchored vessels. In a tavern near the water, sailors lean across scarred tables while candle smoke coils above their faces. One speaks of a merchant ship sailing soon with valuable cargo. Another says that a small, swift vessel can be taken with little bloodshed. A third remembers wages never paid and scars left by an officer's whip. Outside, masts sway against the moonlit sky, creaking as though the ships themselves are whispering. By morning, several men will be missing from their lodgings. By the next moon, they may be sailing under no lawful commission, trusting only their weapons, their companions, and the fearful freedom of the sea. Pirates were not born upon the gallows. They were made in ports, on decks, in wars, in hunger, and in the cruel uncertainty of an oceanic world where legal violence and criminal violence often wore the same salt-stained face. The ocean was no empty wilderness. By the opening years of the 18th century, it had become a vast moving marketplace, crossed by ships whose holds were filled with the products of distant lands and the ambitions of competing empires. Along the Atlantic coastlines, across warm Caribbean channels, past the wooded shores of North America and towards the fevered ports of West Africa, sails multiplied upon the horizon. Some ships carried sugar packed into barrels, harvested through enslaved labour beneath the punishing sun of island plantations. Some carried tobacco, indigo, rice, timber, cocoa, spices, dyed cloth, weapons, coins, and silver. Others carried human beings chained in darkness below deck, victims of a trade so vast and so cruel that the ocean itself seemed burdened by their suffering. This was the world in which piracy flourished, not in an age of emptiness, but in an age of abundance. Every merchant vessel was a gamble upon the sea. A ship leaving a harbour might carry more wealth in its hold than many coastal settlements would see in an entire year. Yet it sailed through waters too immense to patrol completely, defended by a handful of guns, a tired crew, and a captain praying that the dark shape glimpsed at sunrise was merely another trader. The Caribbean lay near the centre of this restless commercial web. Its islands were beautiful from a distance, rising green and bright above turquoise water, but their beauty concealed a landscape of conquest and extraction. Plantations produced immense fortunes. Colonial ports swelled with barrels, warehouses, taverns, chandlers, labourers, sailors, enslaved men and women, soldiers, merchants, officials, and fugitives. The wealth of the islands flowed outward in convoys, supplies flowed inward. Wherever valuable ships gathered, predators soon followed. A pirate captain needed no grand kingdom. He needed intelligence, wind, ammunition, and a crew willing to act quickly. Harbour gossip supplied what charts could not. Sailors talked while drinking. Dock labourers knew which vessel had loaded sugar or silver. Innkeepers heard rumours of departure dates. Corrupt officials might exchange silence for a share of stolen goods. A pirate vessel lurking beyond a headland could know precisely which ship to pursue, and precisely how much risk its capture would be worth. At sea, the hunt often began with uncertainty. Imagine a merchant crew at midday, the heat lying heavily across the deck. The sea is calm enough for sunlight to shatter upon its surface like fragments of glass. A lookout calls down from above. A sail has appeared behind them. For a time, there is no reason to panic. Ships meet constantly upon the ocean, but the distant vessel holds its course. It gains upon them. More sail is raised. The captain takes out his glass and watches the approaching hull with a tightening expression. There is something wrong about the speed, something deliberate in the pursuit. Orders break the stillness. Men scramble to lines. Canvas fills overhead. The merchant vessel strains into motion, heavy with cargo, while the pursuer slips through the water with the lean hunger of an animal that has chosen its prey. Hours may pass in this terrible contest, every mile drawing the pursuing ship closer. Men glance backwards. They see figures gathering upon the other deck. They see gun ports. Perhaps they see a flag raised only at the final moment. Not always a painted skull and bones, but a signal plain enough to communicate a dreadful truth. Surrender or be broken. For many merchant captains, resistance was an impossible decision. Their vessels were built to carry goods, not to survive combat. Their crews might be outnumbered, their powder limited, their passengers terrified. One exchange of cannon fire could splinter masts, tear through human bodies, ignite cargo, or leave a wounded ship helpless in open water. To surrender meant humiliation and loss. To resist meant the possibility of death for everyone aboard. Thus pirate success was often built not upon battle, but upon fear. Reputation arrived first, racing ahead of a notorious captain like storm clouds upon the water. A crew known for mercy towards surrendering ships might take prizes without firing a cannon. A crew known for cruelty could make sailors abandon resistance entirely. Knowing the cost of defiance might be unbearable. The sea lanes offered many hiding places. Islands formed channels and coves where shallow waters defeated large naval vessels. Mangrove inlets concealed small craft. Remote anchorages supplied fresh water and repaired hulls far from official scrutiny. Storms scattered patrol ships. Reefs destroyed careless pursuers. Heat, disease, and distance wore down even disciplined crews. The governments claiming mastery over these waters possessed flags, maps, governors, forts, laws, and proud declarations. Yet their true reach could be painfully thin. A governor might rule from an impressive building overlooking a harbour, but beyond the cannon range of his fort, control weakened quickly. Naval warships were expensive, and imperial rivals demanded attention across enormous distances. A vessel sent to protect one convoy was absent from another route. A patrol delayed by repairs or sickness left merchant shipping exposed for weeks. Pirates understood the gaps in empire because they lived inside them. Certain harbours became places of remarkable danger and opportunity. Nassau, on the island of New Providence in the Bahamas, came to embody the pirate moment. Its waters offered access to important shipping routes, while its weakened defences and uncertain authority made it an inviting refuge. Ships could be careened there, their hulls cleaned and repaired upon the shore. Stolen cargo could be sorted. Crews could drink, quarrel, recruit new companions, and hear news from every direction of the compass. There, amid palm, sand, shallow blue water, rotting wharves, crude houses, taverns, and anchored vessels, a strange temporary society gathered. It was populated not only by famous captains, but by hundreds of ordinary men whose names rarely survived in court papers or printed tales. They cooked meals, stitched torn sailcloth, loaded weapons, rolled barrels, treated injuries, gambled away coins, and wondered how long luck could last. For a few years, it must have seemed that the established order had loosened its grip. Merchant captains altered routes in fear. Colonial officials complained bitterly of insufficient protection. Goods were delayed. Insurance costs rose. Sailors taken from captured vessels carried stories into every port. Tales of sudden wealth grew brighter in retelling, while the sight of pirate ships resting openly in sheltered waters suggested that distant rulers could not command every shore. The pirate vessel became more than an armed ship. It became a rumour made visible, a troubling proof that men cast aside by war and commerce might seize the machinery of trade for themselves. Yet that freedom was always unstable. Pirate crews depended upon the very commercial world they attacked. They needed food, powder, sails, medicine, timber, weapons, buyers for captured goods, and settlements willing to risk dealing with them. They could plunder riches, but they could not easily produce what sustained life at sea. Their rebellion fed upon the trade routes like flame upon dry timber, blazing brightly only while enough material remained to burn. Still, beneath moonlit skies, in harbours where stolen ships rocked softly at anchor, the pirate age seemed formidable. The sea carried wealth in astonishing quantities. Authority was distant. The roots of empire stretched too far and too thin. And upon the warm darkness of Atlantic waters, men who possessed almost nothing discovered that a swift ship, a few loaded guns, and a terrifying reputation could make the mightiest merchants tremble. A ship under pursuit does not lose its freedom in a single instant. It loses it piece by piece. First comes the sight of the chasing vessel, low upon the water and gaining steadily. Then the orders shouted with rising urgency. Then the strained canvas, the creaking timbers, the uneasy glances exchanged between men who know that their ship is too slow. At last comes the flash of gunpowder across the waves, followed by a cannon shot plunging into the sea nearby, sending white water high into the air. It is not intended to sink them. Not yet. It is a command given in smoke and iron. Heave to, for a pirate crew whose luck has turned. The pursuer may be a naval warship, heavily armed, disciplined, and crowded with men trained to fire and reload, amid noise and confusion. Such vessels were built not merely to chase, but to dominate. Their guns sat behind rows of dark ports. Their decks were ordered worlds of rope, brass, oak, powder, shouted commands, and terrifying purpose. Against them, many pirate craft possess speed and boldness, but little hope once trapped in open water. The pirate captain must choose quickly. Flight may already be impossible. Surrender offers no promise of mercy. Resistance might kill men who have spent years escaping death from disease, battle, storm, and hunger. Yet a captain who submits too easily risks contempt among his own crew. For each man aboard understands that capture may mean a trial, a sentence, and a rope. The first full broadside tears away all illusion. Smoke rolls thick across the sea. The blast is felt in the ribs before the sound has fully passed. Iron shot crashes through rails and rigging. Splinters fly like jagged knives. A sailor gripping a line falls without a word. Another staggers across the deck with blood bright upon his shirt. A mast groans, its sails collapsing in a ruin of canvas and cordage, dragging along the water like the broken wing of some great sea-bird. Men who once rushed screaming onto merchant decks now crouch behind barrels, clutching muskets, staring at a naval ship whose next volley may shatter them completely. Sometimes there is desperate resistance. Pistols fire through the smoke. Small cannon answer with flashes of flame. Men curse, pray, reload, and slip on blood and seawater. The pirate vessel may attempt one final maneuver, steering close enough to board, hoping that confusion and close combat can undo the superior force of the king's ship. In such a struggle, the deck becomes an enclosed battlefield. Cutlasses strike. Musket balls pass through sailcloth and flesh. The cries of wounded men mingle with the roar of cannon and the slap of water against the hull. Yet discipline is often decisive. Naval marines fire in ranks, Officers force order upon chaos. Armed sailors swarm aboard with bayonets, pistols, axes, and swords. One by one, the defenders throw down their weapons or are overcome. Then, quite suddenly, the violence ends. The survivors stand with their hands raised, breathing hard in the lingering smoke. Their vessel, once the instrument of their independence, has become the evidence against them. A captured flag hangs torn and limp. Chests, weapons, navigation instruments, letters, cargo, coin, and the ship's own papers will be searched, counted, recorded, and eventually spoken of in a courtroom. Even the dead may serve the prosecution, their bodies silent witnesses to the violence of capture. The victors move quickly. Prisoners are separated from weapons. Knives are taken. Pistols are removed from belts. Hidden blades are searched for beneath shirts, inside boots, among bedding and sea chests. Men suspected of command are watched carefully. The captain, quartermaster, or sailing master may be identified by frightened captives from previously seized vessels, by their clothing, by the obedience shown to them, or by the bitterness with which their own companions glance in their direction. The pirate crew has lost more than its ship. It has lost the uncertainty that once protected it. On a distant sea, a man could adopt a new name, grow a beard, change vessels, lie about his history, or disappear among unruly ports. Bound beneath armed guard, his identity becomes a matter of investigation. He is asked his name, his place of birth, his station aboard the vessel, the date upon which he joined the crew, whether he took part willingly, whether he fired upon a ship, whether he received a share of plunder. Each answer may save him or destroy him. Chains are brought up from below, iron rings close around wrists or ankles. For men accustomed to moving across decks with the rolling balance of lifelong sailors, the first weight of restraint is a profound humiliation. They are no longer crewmen in possession of a vessel. They are cargo. Below deck, captivity takes on a different character. The hold is close, damp, and starved of clean air. Light filters through openings in thin and shifting lines. Bilge water gathers foul below the planks. The prisoners sit crowded together beneath the feet of the sailors who defeated them, hearing the familiar sounds of a working ship while being forbidden from joining its life. Above them, sails are repaired, orders are given, meals are prepared, and the prize vessel may be taken in tow or sailed under a guarding crew towards port. The wounded face a terrible uncertainty. A man struck by shot or splinter may receive attention not from kindness, but because an accused prisoner must be kept alive long enough to answer charges. A ship's surgeon, sleeves stained and instruments laid upon a cloth, may probe a wound while the patient bites down upon leather. Limbs shattered beyond repair are removed with ruthless speed. Fever follows. Infection follows. Some prisoners die without reaching any courtroom, wrapped in cloth and lowered into the same sea across which they once sought fortune. Those who survive begin rehearsing their innocence. One says he was forced aboard. Another claims he never handled a weapon. Another insists he served merely as a cook or carpenter. Young sailors plead ignorance. Older men point fingers towards their officers. Some know that witnesses may contradict them. Some know that captured merchant sailors can describe their faces and voices. A prisoner who has spent months sharing danger and stolen goods with his companions may discover, in the darkness of confinement, that loyalty thins quickly when death waits on shore. The voyage to legal custody can be long. A capture made among tropical islands may require transport through seas disturbed by hurricanes, sickness, contrary wind, and naval duties. Prisoners must be fed, guarded, and prevented from escape. A sudden storm might offer a desperate chance. A careless sentry, a loose fastening, a hidden nail worked patiently against rope. Any small weakness can revive the dream of freedom. For this reason, guards sleep lightly and weapons remain close. When land is finally sighted, it offers no comfort. The harbour into which the captured men are carried may be crowded with vessels, cranes, storehouses, fortifications, and people eager for news. Word spreads rapidly that pirates have been taken. Boats draw near, faces turn from quays and decks. The prisoners emerge blinking into daylight, chained together, their clothing ragged, their skin marked by salt, wounds, hunger, and confinement. To the spectators, they are creatures from frightening stories, sea wolves brought at last within the reach of law. To themselves, they are men standing upon solid ground with the terrible knowledge that they may never again feel a deck rise freely beneath their feet. They are marched away beneath guard. Behind them lies the captured ship, now silent at anchor, its sails furled, its secrets open to officials. Ahead wait stone cells, questioning voices, written charges, and the heavy machinery of judgment. Upon the ocean, freedom could vanish in smoke. On land, it would be measured in ink. The room is crowded long before the prisoners enter. Candles burn in metal holders, their flames disturbed whenever a door opens upon the humid harbour air. Damp coats brush against benches. Clerks arrange quills, sand, folded papers, and heavy ledgers upon a table. Merchants sit near naval officers, each anxious to hear how the Crown will deal with men accused of turning the sea lanes into hunting grounds. At the far end of the chamber, beneath symbols of royal authority, the commissioners prepare to sit in judgment. This is not the wild uncertainty of a shipboard struggle. It is something colder. Violence has been translated into language. A cannon shot becomes an accusation. A seized chest becomes evidence. A terrified merchant sailor becomes a witness. A pirate, stripped of weapon and vessel, must now confront a system whose greatest strength lies in its calm appearance of order. Piracy was a crime unlike theft committed in a market or murder committed in a village lane. It happened far from ordinary courts, often beyond the view of any magistrate, upon shifting waters where victims, witnesses, cargoes, and ships might vanish forever. The law, therefore, had to reach outward, following sailors across the ocean and bringing the authority of government into harbours separated from London by months of dangerous sailing. For a long period, the High Court of Admiralty in England held responsibility for maritime offences, yet the growing reach of piracy created a practical difficulty. Sending every accused pirate across the Atlantic required guards, provisions, secure ships, and considerable expense. During the journey, witnesses might disappear, die, change their stories, or simply refuse to remain available. Prisoners might perish of fever or find an opportunity to escape. Meanwhile, colonial communities complained that men who had robbed and threatened their shipping remained unpunished while legal decisions waited upon distant officials. At the end of the 17th century, the government altered this arrangement. Special commissions could be established in colonies and overseas possessions, permitting piracy trials to take place much nearer to the waters where offences had been committed. A court might now be assembled in Jamaica, Virginia, South Carolina, the Bahamas, or another port where the consequences of piracy had been sharply felt. The setting varied, but the purpose was unmistakable. A commission commonly drew upon prominent men whose lives were bound to maritime trade and imperial authority. The governor might preside, joined by judges, naval officers, customs officials, merchants, or councillors. They were not detached from the damage piracy caused. Their fortunes, security, reputation, and political power depended upon ships arriving safely with cargo intact. The prisoner might therefore look across the chamber and see not merely judges, but representatives of the commercial world he was accused of attacking. The charges are read aloud. The prisoner is named, sometimes alongside many companions. The court describes a vessel assaulted upon the open sea, cargo unlawfully seized, officers threatened, sailors beaten, perhaps passengers murdered. The language is formal and elaborate, presenting piracy as a crime not merely against individual victims, but against sovereign authority, peaceful navigation, and the proper order of the ocean. A man who once hid behind an assumed name may hear his full identity spoken in public. As name carried quietly through taverns, and aboard uncertain decks is fixed in a legal record. The clerk dips his quill. Ink gathers the fragments of an outlaw life and binds them upon the page. The prisoner is called upon to plead. Some deny everything. Some admit presence aboard a pirate ship but insist they were forced to join. This was one of the most common defences, for sailors captured from merchant vessels genuinely could be compelled into service. A frightened young deckhand might claim that he dared not refuse armed men. A carpenter might argue that he repaired a vessel only because refusal would have meant death. A surgeon might insist that his duties were humane rather than criminal. Such pleas were not impossible to believe, but they demanded evidence. The court listened closely for signs of willing participation. Had the accused accepted a share of stolen goods? Had he carried a weapon during a capture? Had he voted with the crew? Had he helped threaten a merchant captain? Had witnesses seen him drinking freely, boasting of his profits, or attempting to flee when naval forces approached? A man who said he had been imprisoned among pirates would struggle to explain why he wore fine clothing taken from a captured passenger, or why coin from a seized cargo had been found among his possessions. Witnesses were brought forward one at a time. A merchant captain might describe the hour when an unfamiliar vessel bore down upon him. He might recall the shouted threats, the pistol pressed against his chest, the breaking open of locked stores, the removal of charts, food, sailcloth, medicine, gold, or trade goods. A sailor might point towards one prisoner and swear that this was the man who guarded the deck while his ship was ransacked. A passenger, still shaken by memories of confinement, might identify a voice, a face, or a cruel act committed during the capture. The accused could challenge testimony, yet he faced enormous disadvantages. He often lacked legal counsel. He might be illiterate, exhausted, injured, or bewildered by formal procedure. His witnesses, those who could claim he acted unwillingly or behaved mercifully, might be imprisoned beside him, dead at sea, scattered through distant ports, or considered unreliable because they too faced accusations of piracy. There were also witnesses drawn from within the captured crew itself. The promise of mercy could loosen many tongues. A sailor seeking to save his own life might identify the captain, explain how prizes were divided, name those who took part most eagerly, and describe crimes hidden from outsiders. Friendship forged at sea could unravel beneath the gaze of a courtroom. The prisoner sitting silently on the bench might hear a former companion recount conversations once spoken privately beneath stars and sailcloth. Objects also spoke. A captured ship could hold a troubling archive of its own. Stolen cargo bearing merchants' marks, navigational papers taken from previous victims, weapons in unusual quantity, clothing, coins, rings, plate, or personal items recognized by those who had been robbed, articles of agreement signed or marked by crewmen, lists of divided shares, letters, flags. Even alterations to a vessel might suggest a deliberate conversion from trade to predation, with extra weapons placed for speed and attack rather than peaceful commerce. No modern forensic science illuminated these cases. There was no analysis of fingerprints, no photographic record, no laboratory capable of testing residue upon a weapon. Judgment rested upon spoken recollection, written depositions, material possessions, official assumptions, and the persuasive force of reputation. A feared pirate captain entered court already shadowed by rumour. An unknown sailor might depend entirely upon whether commissioners believed his claim of compulsion. Proceedings could move with startling speed. A trial involving several prisoners might pass rapidly through accusations, witness accounts, pleas, deliberation, and sentence. To officials, the evidence seemed overwhelming and the danger urgent. To the accused, hours in a crowded chamber could consume the final hope of an entire life. At last, the commissioners confer. The murmur of spectators fades. Prisoners study faces for the smallest sign of mercy. Some clench their hands, some look down, some whisper prayers they have not spoken since childhood. The verdict is pronounced. A few may be acquitted. Some may be spared through cooperation or proof that they served unwillingly. For others, the words fall with absolute weight. Guilty of piracy, sentence of death. Outside the courtroom, the harbour continues its labour. Ropes strain, bells sound, barrels roll over planks, and ships prepare to sail into waters bright beneath the sun. Within the chamber, the clerk dries the final lines of ink. Justice has completed its transformation. The Sea Raider is now a convicted criminal, and the power that could not always catch him upon the ocean has captured him completely through paper, testimony, and judgment. A merchant waits beside the harbour with a letter clenched in his hand. The paper has crossed an ocean more successfully than the vessel whose loss it describes. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a ship carrying sugar, indigo, timber, silver coin, or manufactured goods has failed to arrive. Its owners have received no cargo, its sailors have brought home no wages, its creditors still demand payment. Its insurers must decide whether ruin has been delivered by reef, storm, shipwreck, or an armed crew who watch the sea roads like wolves beside a forest track. In a world joined together by sail, the disappearance of a single ship could send suffering far inland. A warehouse remained empty. A merchant could not repay money borrowed for an expedition. A family waited for a son whose fate was unknown. Dock labourers found no cargo to unload. Shopkeepers received no imported goods. Colonial planters feared their harvest would rot without safe transport. Naval officers were accused of failing in their duty. Governors received anxious petitions written by men whose fortunes depended upon the safe movement of vessels through waters that no authority could completely command. Piracy was therefore more than robbery. To governments, it was an infection within the bloodstream of commerce. Left unanswered, it threatened confidence itself. A ship could be rebuilt. Cargo could sometimes be replaced. Yet fear travelled invisibly from tavern to warehouse, from counting house to harbour office. Once sailors believed a route had become too dangerous, crews demanded higher wages or refused voyages. Once merchants believed their goods were exposed, they raised prices, delayed shipments, sought armed escorts, or moved their business elsewhere. Once colonial communities saw pirate vessels arriving openly to sell stolen property, the authority of lawful government seemed feeble and uncertain. Every successful pirate voyage carried an unsettling message. The sea might belong not to kings, admirals, and merchants, but to any determined band of armed men bold enough to take what moved across it. Such an idea had to be crushed quickly. The sea was too large for punishment to rely entirely upon capture. A naval squadron could patrol for weeks and see only rolling water, flying fish, rain squalls, merchant sails, and distant islands. A pirate crew warned of danger could scatter, abandon a captured vessel, assume false names, hide among fishing settlements, or vanish into another ocean. Every pursuit consumed food, powder, sailcloth, labour, and money. Every warship diverted to chase raiders was unavailable for military defence, convoy protection, diplomatic pressure, or the transport of official orders. A government unable to catch every pirate sought to magnify the power of those captures it achieved. Speed gave punishment a sharper edge. If months and years passed while prisoners languished uncertainly in confinement, the connection between crime and consequence weakened in the minds of watching sailors. News of a hanging carried out close to the time of capture moved rapidly along the waterfront. A vessel entered harbour with condemned men in chains. A trial followed. A sentence was pronounced. Soon the bodies hung where mariners could see them. The message was simple enough to survive retelling across crowded inns and upon night watches at sea. Piracy might promise wealth for a season. It might end with terrifying suddenness. The authorities knew their audience. It was not only the convicted sailor standing beneath the rope. It was every unemployed seaman drinking in a port where a pirate recruiter might offer easy profit. It was every naval deserter considering whether a stolen boat could carry him into a new life. It was every private raider tempted to ignore the end of war and continue attacking whatever vessel appeared vulnerable. It was every harbour official inclined to purchase stolen goods or accept payment for silence. The execution punished one body, but it was designed to govern thousands of imaginations. There was another reason for haste, less theatrical but equally powerful. Captured pirates were difficult prisoners. A land-based thief could be confined within reach of the local court and local witnesses. A pirate captured far from the place of his offence created an expensive burden. He required guards aboard ship, provisions during transport, secure lodgings upon arrival, medical attention if wounded, and constant vigilance against escape. A group of prisoners might include experienced sailors, fighters, navigators, and men hardened by years of risk, left together. They could plan mutiny within a transport ship or riot within a jail. Separated, they required more guards and more space. Even the climate worked against delay. In tropical ports, disease could sweep through crowded places of detention with little warning. Fever might kill a prisoner whose testimony could expose other pirates. It might take the life of a merchant witness needed to prove guilt. Hurricanes interrupted travel. War closed sea lanes. Letters disappeared. Officials were replaced. The longer proceedings lingered, the less certain a successful prosecution became. Haste was not simply anger. It was administration struggling against distance, expense, illness, and the unreliable rhythm of wind-driven communication. The colonial governor faced a perilous balance. If he acted weakly, merchants complained that the harbour was unsafe and naval power useless. If he tolerated those who traded with pirates, respectable commerce began to merge with criminal profit. If he allowed famous captains to escape, every restless sailor heard that the government could be mocked without consequence. His reputation rested upon ships, taxes, obedience, and the appearance of command. When captured pirates were condemned rapidly, authority staged its own restoration. The courtroom declared the law. The gallows displayed its final reach, cannons in the fort, uniforms along the quay, armed guards beside the condemned, and official notices read publicly all contributed to the same performance. The government might have been unable to prevent every attack at sea, but it could prove that those placed within its grasp would not be handled gently. This severity was also shaped by the nature of empire. European powers fought bitterly over coastlines, islands, trade monopolies, plantation wealth, and access to ocean routes. Piracy disturbed not only commerce but diplomacy. A raider who attacked the wrong vessel could provoke complaint from a rival power, embarrass a governor, threaten a fragile peace, or provide an excuse for military retaliation. Stolen goods sold openly in a colonial harbour suggested corruption or deliberate hostility. An outlaw captain could become an international problem, one whose continued freedom made rulers appear either complicit or incompetent. Thus the pirate stood accused within a far greater struggle than his own capture. His fate became entangled with sugar estates, customs duties, naval budgets, commercial credit, political reputation, colonial obedience, and the rivalry of empires. Yet the rapidity of punishment carried a darkness of its own. When officials feel threatened, mercy can appear dangerous. Careful doubt can seem like weakness. A man who truly joined a crew under compulsion might find his plea dismissed because the port needed reassurance. A sailor whose crime was smaller than that of his captain might face the same fatal sentence because authorities wished to display unity and resolve. Testimony offered by frightened witnesses or desperate informers could gain great power in a climate hungry for convictions. Justice moved quickly because the world around it was anxious. Anxious for profit, anxious for safety, anxious for control, anxious that the sea, vast and glittering beneath the sun, might reveal how fragile lawful order truly was. In the quiet of an evening harbour, a sailor could look upon the masts and imagine freedom waiting beyond the tide. The government wanted another image to rise in his mind. Not a captured cargo, not a purse heavy with coin, not a tropical anchorage filled with laughter and stolen wine. A scaffold, a rope, a crowd watching in silence. Swift justice was meant to arrive in the imagination long before any pirate ship raised sail. There are deaths which end a man's life, and there are deaths which begin a legend. On the 23rd day of May in the year 1701, London gathered to witness the destruction of William Kidd. His name had already begun its strange transformation. To officials, he was a convicted pirate and murderer. To merchants, he was a warning written in flesh. To enemies in politics, he was an embarrassment best silenced beneath a rope. To generations yet unborn, he would become Captain Kidd, the spectral guardian of buried treasure, secret maps, hidden gold, and ships lost in the mist of story. But the living man approaching the scaffold was no fantasy figure. He was tired, condemned, and trapped inside a web of loyalties that had tightened around him until no escape remained. William Kidd had not begun as a fugitive hunted by every lawful vessel. He had been a respected seaman connected with New York, a property owner, a husband, and an experienced commander. In an age when maritime violence could be granted legality by written commission, he entered a venture supported by powerful men. His mission was to hunt pirates and capture enemy shipping. Money, influence, ambition, and imperial warfare all stood behind the voyage. His vessel, the Adventure Galley, was built for pursuit. It possessed sails for speed and oars for movement when the wind weakened. Its crew expected profit, because such expeditions did not survive upon noble purpose alone. Men joined in the belief that prizes would be taken and shares distributed. They accepted hunger, sickness, heat, discipline, and danger because the voyage might return them home with wealth enough to change their lives. Yet the ocean did not yield its rewards obediently. Month followed month. Disease weakened the crew, supplies dwindled, profitable lawful targets proved difficult to seize. Suspicion grew among men who had not gone to sea merely to watch distant sails escape. A captain commanding disappointed sailors stood in dangerous territory. He carried official instructions in his papers, but aboard his vessel he also faced the impatience of armed men who believed fortune was slipping from their hands. In those troubled waters, the distinction between commissioned hunter and hunted pirate began to fracture. One death would cling closely to Kidd's name. During a quarrel aboard ship, he struck a gunner named William Moore with a heavy bucket. Moore later died. Kidd would claim that the man had been mutinous and provocative. The law would see a killing. The incident was not a whispered rumour from a captured merchant ship. It was a death within Kidd's own command, remembered by men who could later speak against him. Then came the seizure that changed everything. In the Indian Ocean, Kidd captured a rich vessel called the Quedagh Merchant. The ship carried valuable goods and possessed papers connected with French protection, a detail Kidd believed made the seizure lawful under the terms of his commission. But the vessel was also connected with interests whose anger carried great weight. The cargo was precious. The complaints were powerful. The political protection upon which Kidd may once have relied began to evaporate. Across long distances, news arrived distorted by rivalry, accusation, and fear. The pirate hunter was increasingly described as a pirate himself. Men who had invested in his expedition faced an unpleasant danger. If Kidd's conduct appeared criminal, questions might be asked about those who had helped place him upon the sea. Reputation, influence, and political survival all demanded distance from the captain who had once been useful. Kidd returned towards the American colonies, believing, perhaps, that he could explain himself. He carried documents that he considered important to his defence. He sought contact with Lord Bellamont, the powerful governor who had been involved in his commission. Instead of rescue, Kidd found arrest. There is a cold sadness in this moment. A man who had sailed oceans under authority discovered that authority no longer wished to know him as a servant. His deeds had become dangerous. His cargo had become evidence. His former supporters had become shadows beyond reach. He was sent across the Atlantic in confinement and placed before an English court. At his trial, he faced charges of piracy and the murder of William Moore. He asked for papers he believed would support his claim that captured shipping had sailed under French protection. Whether those papers would truly have saved him remains uncertain, but they were not available to him in the courtroom at the moment he most desperately needed them. The proceedings carried the weight of more than one man's guilt. Politics hung over the chamber. Parliamentary controversy surrounded the venture. Powerful reputations required protection. Kidd stood at the centre of a storm created not only by what he had done, but by what others feared his story might reveal. The verdict came without mercy. Guilty of murder, guilty of piracy, condemned to hang. On the day appointed for his death, Kidd was taken towards execution dock at Wapping. The city knew his name. Crowds gathered thickly, drawn by curiosity, outrage, excitement, and the ancient human hunger to look upon a famous man at the hour when fame offers no shelter. He passed through a world he had once inhabited as a successful captain. The warehouses, river stairs, masts, taverns, damp stones, shouting watermen, and broad grey Thames would have been familiar to him, yet he now travelled through them not as commander, merchant, or private raider, but as a prisoner displayed for the satisfaction of the law. Near the scaffold, the river shifted over mud and weed. Ships moved upon the tide, their crews aware that this execution had been arranged for their understanding. Kidd was not an anonymous body. His renown made the lesson greater. If such a captain, supported once by wealthy and influential men, could be delivered to the rope, then the common sailor could expect no shield at all. Accounts describe Kidd addressing those assembled, warning shipmasters to learn from his fate. There was little left for him to offer except words, and even those were swallowed by the occasion. He could plead, accuse, confess, or protest. But the timber stood ready. The executioner was waiting, and the crowd had not assembled to see a sentence reconsidered. His hands were bound, the noose was fitted. Then the signal came, Kidd fell, and the rope broke. For one astonishing moment, death released him. His body plunged downward, striking the ground beneath the scaffold, stunned but alive. A sound must have moved through the assembled crowd, a roar, a gasp, a great confused shudder of voices. In popular belief, a broken rope could seem more than an accident. It could appear to be the intervention of Providence, a sign that a life condemned by men had been refused by heaven. Imagine Kidd in that instant, sprawled in the riverside mud, the failed noose still close to his skin, breath returning in shocked fragments. Above him, the scaffold loomed. Around him, thousands had seen the impossible. The boundary between life and death, so final only a heartbeat earlier, had opened briefly beneath him. Had he believed himself spared? Had hope, sharp and unbearable, risen within him? No reprieve came. Officials did not treat the broken rope as divine judgment. They treated it as failed equipment. Kidd was lifted again. Perhaps his legs could barely support him. Perhaps the river wind cooled the mud upon his clothing. Perhaps the murmuring crowd now watched not with excitement, but with an uneasy recognition of cruelty too plain to disguise. A second rope was prepared. A second noose closed around his neck. This time the other rope held. The death of William Kidd was not permitted to end with the hanging itself. His body was placed in chains and displayed beside the Thames at Tilbury, where passing sailors could see what had become of one of the most famous condemned captains of his age. Wind, rain, birds, tide, and time worked upon his remains while ships passed onward towards oceans he would never sail again. Thus a privateer became a pirate in public memory, and a condemned man became a legend. Whether Kidd was guilty of every crime attached to his name, whether he was sacrificed to protect powerful interests, whether missing documents might have altered his fate, these questions have continued to trouble the waters of history. Yet one fact remains brutal and unchanging. When the rope broke, the authorities were offered a moment of mercy. They chose a second rope. The rope was ordinary hemp. It had been twisted from plant fibre, handled by workmen, coiled upon damp boards, measured, tested, and carried into position like any other piece of equipment used along a working river, in a port crowded with rigging, anchor lines, mooring cables, nets, and sailcloth. Rope was everywhere. It held ships to quays. It raised cargo. It steadied masts. It saved sailors thrown into violent water. At an execution, the same familiar material became an object of dread. For the condemned pirate, there was no need to explain what a rope could do. He had lived his life among lines drawn tight by wind and weight. He understood strain. He knew the sound of fibre creaking under pressure. He had watched knots hold under storms and seen loose coils snap suddenly across a deck with enough force to shatter bone. The instrument placed around his neck was not foreign to him. It belonged to the sea world he knew best. Altered now from servant into executioner, public hanging in this period rarely offered the sudden death later generations associated with carefully calculated drops. The prisoner did not usually fall through a great distance intended to break the neck at once. At a maritime execution, the drop could be short and dreadful. The body was turned into its own burden, suspended by the neck while life faded through constriction, panic, and exhaustion. The body does not surrender easily. When the support beneath the feet is removed, instinct erupts. Muscles tighten violently. The legs struggle for ground that is no longer there. The shoulders twist. Bound hands strain uselessly against their fastening. The chest tries to draw breath while the rope presses cruelly into the throat. The face changes as blood and air are obstructed. The mouth opens. The condemned man, so recently able to speak his final words, becomes trapped within a private catastrophe, watched by hundreds or thousands of living eyes. There was no curtain to hide him, no sealed chamber, no attempt to spare onlookers the work of death. The crowd saw the kicking. They saw the trembling limbs and the terrible duration of the hanging. They saw the executioner perhaps pull upon the legs, not from tenderness, but to hasten a death taking too long. They saw relatives, companions, clergy, officers, merchants, children, labourers, prostitutes, servants, and sailors all sharing the same spectacle, each person free to interpret it as warning, punishment, entertainment, tragedy, or proof that the law had done its work. Sound must have made the scene more haunting still. The river lapping below, the slap of loose sailcloth against a nearby mast, the restless murmur of the spectators, a gull crying above the roofs, the shifting timber of the scaffold, a chaplain continuing to pray because prayer was the only language permitted once the sentence had begun, the condemned man's boots striking emptiness, or the wooden frame, or the dangling edge of a ladder as his body fought its last involuntary battle. A hanging could take several minutes. Time changed its shape beneath the scaffold. A crowd that had arrived in excitement might grow quiet when death proved slower than imagination. The human body hanging from a rope did not resemble a heroic death in battle, wrapped in smoke and swift violence. There was no charge, no cannon thunder to overwhelm thought, no confusion through which a spectator might avoid the plain meaning of what was happening. There was simply a man, gradually becoming still. The authorities understood the usefulness of this stillness. A pirate execution was not arranged in private because private death could not discipline the harbour. Punishment had to enter memory through the senses. A sailor tempted by stolen wealth needed to remember not merely a proclamation or a sermon, but the sight of boots twitching above the riverbank. A merchant wanted assurance that the government was severe. A ship captain wanted his crew reminded of the consequences of mutiny and unlawful raiding. Officials wanted the condemned body to speak for the power of the state without requiring any further explanation. Pain became a public language. The ritual surrounding the execution deepened its meaning. The condemned might be carried by cart or escorted under guard through streets crowded with watchers. His clothing, expression, injuries, and behaviour became matters of public inspection. Was he pale? Did he pray? Did he laugh defiantly? Did he confess? Did he weep? The crowd searched his face for some final revelation, as though a man's true nature would appear clearly once he stood close enough to death. Some condemned pirates attempted courage. They might dress carefully, speak boldly, or behave with an outward calm intended to deny their enemies the pleasure of seeing fear. Such conduct could enhance a pirate's legend. A man who faced death with apparent contempt might be admired by sailors already distrustful of authority. The law therefore relied upon the body's eventual helplessness. No matter how confident the speech, no matter how composed the face, the rope would display submission in the end. Others broke before the final moment. Their fear was neither unusual nor shameful. The journey to execution allowed imagination to work with monstrous precision. A prisoner might have heard hangings from within a cell, spoken with men who had watched them, or observed the scaffold from a distance. He knew the sequence, the binding, the prayers, the placement beneath the beam, the touch of the noose, the sudden absence of support. Each step awaited him with unbearable certainty. Sleep on the final night may have been impossible. The mind returns again and again to the same image, refusing escape. A man might listen for footsteps in a prison passage and wonder whether each sound marked the beginning of his removal. He might touch his throat. He might recall nearly drowning during some distant storm and understand that he was soon to face another form of suffocation, this time surrounded not by wild waves, but by organized witnesses. For the crowd, attendance carried its own unease. Public executions were social gatherings, yet they were also encounters with mortality. Food might be sold, drink might circulate, pickpockets might work among tightly packed bodies, spectators might exchange rumours of the pirates' crimes, embellishing every detail as the scaffold waited nearby. But when the body dropped, amusement could be pierced by something darker. Every person watching possessed a throat, a breath, a beating heart. The condemned man's struggle revealed the frailty shared by pirate, merchant, officer, beggar, and child. A society that condemned piracy as savage was prepared to answer savagery with calculated suffering. The contradiction did not trouble everyone. To many observers, a violent criminal deserved a violent end. A man accused of terrorizing peaceful sailors, stealing ships, torturing captives, or killing those who resisted had surrendered any claim to gentle treatment. Severity was not viewed as cruelty, but as balance restored. Yet the rope could not distinguish among degrees of guilt. It closed around the neck of the notorious captain and the frightened deckhand alike. It made little room for the man coerced into service, the sailor condemned through the testimony of an enemy, or the prisoner whose crime had been magnified by panic and rumour. Once sentence became execution, the uncertainty of human judgment was hidden beneath the certainty of physical death. The tide continued to rise and fall while bodies hung above the river margin. Water moved beneath them as it always had, carrying trading vessels onward and reflecting fragments of sky between hulls and oars. The condemned had once trusted the sea as the place where law grew distant and opportunity widened like an open horizon. At the rope's end, the oceanic dream narrowed to a single breath that could not be drawn. The horror of pirate hanging lay not merely in death, but in its deliberate slowness, its public intimacy, and its grim familiarity. Rope, timber, wind, and tide, all the common elements of a sailor's life, were gathered together and rearranged into a final lesson. The sea had taught him to live among ropes. Justice made certain that he died by one. Death did not always release the pirate from punishment. A body could be declared guilty even when it no longer breathed. It could be claimed by officials, removed from mourning, denied a grave, coated against decay, fastened inside iron, and raised high above the river as an object belonging not to family or faith, but to the authority that had destroyed it. Along the approaches to a great maritime city, The dead could continue their service to justice. A vessel enters the lower reaches of the River Thames under a pale morning sky. The voyage has been long, its sails are weather-stained, its timbers crusted with salt, its crew restless for wages, ale, warm beds, and faces known from home. Men gather near the rail as familiar waters unfold around them. Marshland stretches low beneath the clouds. Waterbirds lift from the reeds. Smoke rises faintly in the distance. The river broadens and narrows with the tide, guiding the ship towards warehouses, markets, shipyards, and the immense breathing life of London. Then a young sailor notices something standing upon the bank. At first it resembles a marker or damaged mast, a dark upright shape against the grey sky. As the ship draws nearer, the form becomes clear. There is a post. From it hangs an iron framework. Within that framework rests what remains of a man. No one aboard needs to ask what he was. The gibbet was an instrument of memory. Its purpose was not to kill, for killing had already been accomplished. Its purpose was to prevent forgetting. Ordinary execution lasted for a morning. A displayed corpse might remain visible through weeks, months, or even years, enduring weather and decay while countless ships sailed within sight of it. The iron cage was fashioned to hold the shape of a human body. Bands enclosed the chest, limbs, and head, keeping the corpse upright even as flesh failed and clothing rotted away. Sometimes the body was treated with tar, a thick black substance used upon timber and rope, intended to slow the work of weather and scavenging birds. Under its dark coating, the executed man lost the appearance of ordinary humanity and became something almost carved from nightmare, a blackened silhouette turning slightly in the wind. At high tide, water moved beneath him. At low tide, mudflats shone wet and gleaming below. In winter, rain struck the iron and cold mist drifted across the river. In summer, sun warmed the tarred remains and the smell might travel upon the air towards passing boats. Birds settled upon the framework. Wind moved through exposed ribs and rusting chains. Storms pulled at the hanging cage until it creaked above the shore like rigging from a vessel, crewed only by the dead. This was not an accidental indignity. Every feature of the location was chosen for its power. A gibbet raised beside a busy waterway possessed a greater audience than one hidden behind prison walls. Sailors leaving for distant seas saw it as they departed. Sailors returning with money in their pockets and tales upon their tongues saw it as they came home. Merchant masters, naval officers, fishing crews, dock labourers, customs officials, passengers, apprentices, and river pilots all passed beneath its silent warning. The criminal body had become a landmark. There were ships whose men used church towers, headlands, windmills, forts, trees, and mooring places to judge their progress along a route. Now, among such points of recognition, stood the chained remains of condemned seafarers. A captain might gesture towards the figure upon the bank and tell an undisciplined boy that this was the reward of mutiny. An officer might point it out to men inclined to desert. A father travelling with a child might avert the young face too late. The dead pirate belonged to every story authority wished to tell about obedience. Yet the sight could inspire reactions far less obedient than officials desired. Some sailors may have stared with disgust, believing that no man, however criminal, should be denied burial and left open to rain and birds. Some may have muttered that governments killed pirates while rewarding powerful men whose fortunes rested upon conquest, forced labour, or war. Some may even have regarded a notorious corpse with reluctant admiration, seeing in its continued display proof that the executed sailor had frightened the authorities deeply enough to be made immortal in iron. A gibbet could condemn a man, but it could also preserve his name. The landscape of the river became crowded with stories. Here hung a captain who seized a richly laden vessel. There hung a sailor convicted after a bloody mutiny. Somewhere downriver hung William Kidd, his body exposed as ships passed towards London, and out towards the oceans that had made him famous. The men enclosed in chains did not speak, yet their tales grew through repetition. A dockside account became an alehouse rumour. A rumour became a ballad. A ballad became a memory repeated until fact and fear were tangled beyond separation. For relatives of the condemned, the punishment must have carried a particular cruelty. Death ordinarily permitted private grief. A body might be washed, wrapped, placed in earth, and visited by those who remembered a different person from the criminal named in court. A mother might recall a child running beside a village shore. A wife might remember a husband leaving with promises of return. A sister might keep a letter folded among her belongings. The gibbet refused that privacy. The body remained public property, made available to every glance and every insult. There was no quiet stone beneath grass, no grave where prayer could be whispered away from strangers. The dead man's family knew that he stood exposed beside the water, changing slowly into bone and rusted iron while sailors laughed, shuddered, prayed, or passed without comment. Punishment reached beyond the condemned and entered the lives of those who had loved him. The most terrible hour may not have been the raising of the cage, nor the first day when crowds gathered to inspect it, but the slow, ordinary passing of time. The novelty faded. People became accustomed to the figure above the river. Barges moved below it. Bargains were struck within sight of it. Rain fell. Children grew older. Ships arrived from one voyage and departed upon another. The pirate became part of the scenery, a dark fixture in the working life of commerce. This was exactly what maritime justice required. The message was strongest when it no longer needed ceremony. A gallows day demanded officials, guards, prayers, executioners, and spectators. A gibbet required only wind, iron, and visibility. It guarded the river without pay. It preached without a voice. It reminded without rest. Yet no display can command meaning forever. Iron corrodes. Rope parts. Timber weakens. Bones fall. Names are misremembered. The river reshapes its edges. Warehouses rise and vanish. Roads alter. Ships change. And the places where condemned men once swung in the wind gradually lose their terror beneath the life of a later city. Still, in the imagination, a vessel glides inward upon the evening tide. Lanterns shine faintly aboard her. Men speak in low voices as the shore darkens. Above the reeds, an iron cage moves softly in the wind, holding the outline of a man whom justice refused to bury. He has no breath, no ship, no weapon, no share of plunder, no chance of escape. Yet he remains upon the river, waiting for every sailor who dares to look up. In the stillness of a prison cell, a candle burns low beside an open book. The condemned sailor is no longer surrounded by shipmates, cannon smoke, charts, weapons, or stolen cargo. The sea has fallen silent. His world has been reduced to stone, straw, iron, and the measured voice of a minister seated close beside him. Outside, the city continues its business. Within this narrow chamber, officials believe another contest has begun, not for the prisoner's life, which is already lost, but for the meaning of his death. The minister turns a page and speaks of sin, judgment, mercy, and the soul. To the authorities of the age, execution was not only a physical punishment, it was also a ceremony of moral restoration. Piracy had represented rebellion against law, property, hierarchy, and the order believed to have been appointed by heaven. A condemned pirate who confessed publicly could therefore be presented as proof that even those who challenged earthly authority recognized its justice in their final hours. His body would die upon the scaffold. His words might be used to discipline the living. The minister assigned to attend him had a solemn purpose. He prayed with the prisoner, instructed him, urged him to examine his life, and pleaded with him to abandon defiance. Perhaps the sailor had not prayed sincerely in many years. Perhaps religion had existed for him only in fragments. A hymn remembered from childhood, a blessing muttered during a storm, a frightened promise spoken while a ship filled with water in darkness. Now those fragments returned with terrible force. The questions were direct. Did he confess the wickedness of his life? Did he acknowledge the justice of his sentence? Did he forgive those who had testified against him? Did he warn others not to follow his path? Would he meet death in repentance rather than stubborn pride? A prisoner faced enormous pressure to answer as expected. He had little power remaining. Food, visitors, spiritual comfort, the treatment of his final hours, and perhaps even the manner in which his name would be remembered all rested partly in the hands of those attending him. A man might truly repent. He might also understand that resistance would bring no rescue, while submission offered at least the possibility of dying with some dignity. For some, the approach of death may have stripped away every defence. A sailor who had spent years boasting of courage could find himself trembling when night closed around his cell. Faces of the dead might return to him. A merchant captain wounded during a raid. A companion abandoned in a damaged boat. A passenger begging for mercy. A crewman killed in a quarrel over divided goods. Acts dismissed in the heat of danger might now rise clearly in memory, no longer protected by drink, laughter, distance, or the constant labour of the deck. The minister listened and wrote. Final confessions were valuable objects in the public world. A man's last speech might be copied, shaped, printed, sold, read aloud, and preserved in a form very different from the uncertain words he truly spoke. Printers understood the appetite for execution literature. Crowds wanted to know whether a notorious offender had admitted guilt, revealed hidden crimes, named companions, described buried riches, or issued warnings from the edge of eternity. A printed account could be purchased cheaply and carried home. It could be read beside a fire, recited in a tavern, placed into the hands of an apprentice, or spoken aloud to sailors crowded into cheap lodging near the docks. The pirate who once inspired rumours of freedom and sudden wealth could be made to deliver another lesson entirely. His printed voice might urge obedience, honest labour, respect for lawful command, and fear of divine punishment. Whether every word belonged to him was another matter. The condemned were rarely masters of their own stories. Some were unable to read or write. Some spoke in rough phrases that a printer might refine into grave and polished language. Some maintained innocence. Yet the printed account might still frame their deaths as examples of sin brought properly to judgment. The market desired a satisfying pattern: wickedness, confession, repentance, execution, warning, a confused, angry, frightened, or unjustly condemned sailor did not fit that pattern so neatly. Thus the final speech could become another form of confinement. The body was held in chains, the reputation was held in print. On the morning of execution, the minister remained close. The condemned might receive bread, drink, or a final prayer. His irons were checked. Officials gathered. The door opened. Cold light entered the cell, revealing the face of a man who had perhaps not slept. The minister might offer a final assurance that sincere repentance could open the gates of heaven, even to one condemned upon earth. For a prisoner who believed, such words may have been his only remaining shelter. The law could not be softened. The rope could not be reasoned with. The crowd could not be made to vanish. Yet within the teachings pressed upon him lay a narrow passage through fear. His earthly name might be ruined, his body destroyed, his crimes proclaimed throughout the port, but his soul, he was told, might still find mercy. The journey towards execution then became almost ceremonial. The prisoner was expected to behave as one moving towards a solemn reckoning. Ministers urged him to avoid drunkenness, blasphemy, angry accusations, or reckless display. A calm, condemned man offered the state a powerful image. He seemed to accept not only death, but the righteousness of the society imposing it. Yet not every pirate surrendered his voice. Some cursed officials, Some protested innocence. Some refused the expected confession. Some spoke of unfair treatment, missing evidence, false witnesses, or companions who had escaped while lesser men were left to suffer. A bold final speech could disturb the carefully arranged moral drama. Spectators might begin to question whether the condemned man was merely wicked, or whether the law had placed a complicated human being beneath a simple label. Officials feared such uncertainty. A scaffold worked best when its meaning appeared settled. There were also condemned men who treated the occasion with unsettling bravado. A sailor familiar with danger might laugh too loudly, request drink, dress in his finest remaining clothes, or offer witty remarks to the crowd. To religious observers, such behaviour revealed a soul lost in hardness. To some watching sailors, it might appear courageous. The minister's task was partly to turn defiance into humility, to guide the prisoner away from becoming a hero of the dockside imagination. The crowd listened keenly when the condemned finally stood in view. A silence might fall when he attempted to speak. His voice could be weak, strained by fear, or strengthened by a final desire to be heard. He might confess his crimes and ask forgiveness. He might warn young seamen against drunken company, greed, mutiny, and the temptation of stolen wealth. He might thank the minister. He might speak the name of his mother, his wife, or his children. He might insist, with his last useful breath, that some charge against him was false. Every listener took away a different truth. To a merchant, repentance confirmed that piracy had been rightly punished. To a minister, it suggested a soul rescued at the final threshold. To a young sailor, the condemned man's fear might outweigh every tale of treasure. To a grieving relative hidden among strangers, the speech might restore a fragment of the person whom official language had reduced to criminal shame. Then prayer replaced speech. The minister's voice continued while the condemned was positioned for death. Words of forgiveness and judgment rose above the movement of the spectators and the creaking waterfront. In that moment, religion and government stood closely joined. One offered eternal mercy, the other imposed earthly destruction. Together they presented the execution as more than revenge or deterrence. It was declared to be a correction of disorder, a cleansing of the sea road, a solemn return of the offender to the moral universe he had violated. But within the prison papers, printed confessions, ministerial accounts, and last speeches lies a haunting uncertainty. What did the condemned truly believe? Did a pirate kneel because his heart had changed, or because the final night had left him no strength to resist? Did he confess because memory tormented him, or because officials demanded a useful ending? Did he fear divine judgment more than the rope, or did he simply long for one compassionate human voice in a world that had decided to kill him? Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. The printed page preserves a lesson carefully shaped for the living. Somewhere beneath its formal phrases rests the trembling breath of a sailor, listening to a minister beside a failing candle, aware that soon his final words would belong not to him, but to the crowd, the printer, the law, and the endless memory of the sea. Not every man accused of piracy died upon a rope. In the cells of coastal prisons, among chained crews brought ashore from captured vessels, hope survived in narrow and shifting forms. A sailor might escape death through testimony. He might persuade a court that he had been forced into service. He might accept a royal pardon offered to men willing to surrender. He might be young enough, useful enough, fortunate enough, or insignificant enough for the law to spare him. For every condemned captain whose name became fixed in legend, there were lesser figures who slipped quietly away from the expected ending. The court wished to distinguish willing pirates from unwilling captives. This was no simple task. A merchant sailor seized at sea might genuinely have been given an appalling choice: serve the raiders, remain imprisoned in misery aboard a hostile ship, or be abandoned where hunger and thirst would accomplish what weapons had not. A carpenter could be compelled to repair the hull. A surgeon could be forced to treat wounded men. A navigator might be ordered to guide a stolen vessel through reefs and channels under threat of violence. Such men might stand in court with chains upon their wrists, appearing no different from the hardened raiders beside them. Their survival depended upon a story that could withstand questioning. A sailor claiming compulsion needed witnesses. Perhaps a rescued merchant captain remembered him refusing a share of plunder. Perhaps another captive recalled whispered assurances that he wanted only to escape. Perhaps he had remained unarmed during a seizure, hidden prisoners from abuse, or attempted to signal a naval vessel. The smallest acts of mercy, scarcely noticed amid the violence of a captured deck, could become precious evidence when death stood close. Yet false claims were common enough to arouse suspicion. Once a pirate crew had been defeated, nearly every prisoner had reason to say that he had sailed unwillingly. Men who had cheered during attacks, consumed stolen provisions, worn stolen clothes, and accepted divided coin could suddenly describe themselves as terrified captives. Commissioners listened with care, and sometimes with impatience. Knowing that innocence and desperation might speak in very similar voices, a single witness could determine whether a sailor walked out into daylight or stood marked for execution. There were also men who saved themselves by turning against their companions. In a prison room thick with damp and fear, an official might offer a prisoner a choice: remain silent and risk hanging with the rest, or speak fully and seek mercy. Name the captain, name the officers, identify the men who fired guns, tortured prisoners, hid goods, planned voyages, bribed officials, or concealed stolen treasure, explain the crew rules, describe the anchorages, reveal the friendly merchants willing to purchase plunder. The bargain was cruel, but its force was difficult to resist. A man who had eaten, fought, sailed, and laughed beside his companions might begin naming them one by one. He might tell himself that the captain had led them into disaster. He might insist he had always wanted escape. He might remember old quarrels, unfair divisions of treasure, insults spoken during drink, or injuries never forgiven. Fear could turn grievance into evidence. In the courtroom, his former companions would recognize what had happened. Their eyes followed him as he took the stand. Perhaps someone cursed him. Perhaps another merely stared in cold silence. For the informer, mercy offered no clean return to ordinary life, even spared from execution. He might carry the knowledge that men had died because his words helped tighten the rope. Some condemned sailors escaped death because authority desired surrender more than blood. During the great effort to suppress piracy in the early 18th century, the Crown offered pardon to pirates who abandoned their trade within a stated period and submitted to lawful authority. The policy was practical. Warships could not find every hidden vessel. Trials and executions were costly. A pardon split crews apart, encouraged mistrust, and gave exhausted men a lawful road home. The announcement moved through harbours and islands with immense significance. Imagine a pirate crew gathered beside a fire on a remote shore. A proclamation has arrived, carried by a vessel from a colonial settlement. Men listen as its terms are read aloud. For years they have lived by sudden violence, uncertain food, drunken celebration, fever, storms, and the ever-present possibility of capture. Some have coin hidden away. Some have wives or parents they have not seen in years. Some have begun to understand that the rich prizes are fewer, naval patrols stronger, and safe ports less welcoming. Now an offer has been placed before them: surrender and live. To some, it sounded like deliverance. They had never dreamed of dying as famous outlaws. They wanted only a small farm, a dockside trade, a modest shop, or a bed that did not move beneath them. Their courage had always concealed exhaustion. They were ready to trade the sea's dangerous freedom for the humbler safety of an ordinary name. To others, pardon sounded like a trap. They distrusted governors, officers, and written promises. They had seen authority alter its judgment when convenient. A man who walked into a fort seeking mercy might instead find his past examined, his enemies summoned, and a charge of murder or unpardoned crime waiting for him. Those who had committed the worst acts understood that a general promise might not protect them from specific accusations. Suspicion divided crews more surely than cannon. One group might surrender while another seized a vessel and sailed away. A captain determined to remain free could see loyalty drained from his deck. Men who once followed him into gunfire now dreamed of legal safety, wages, or home. The pardon did not need to rescue every sailor. It only needed to make continued piracy seem lonelier and more dangerous. Even among those formerly spared, survival was uncertain. A pardoned pirate returning to lawful employment carried skills shaped by years outside ordinary discipline. Merchant captains might distrust him. Neighbours might whisper. Former victims might recognize him in a market or tavern. Money acquired through plunder vanished quickly. A man accustomed to divided prize goods could find ordinary wages bitterly small. Some took the pardon, attempted a quiet existence, then returned to raiding when poverty or restlessness overtook them. Having rejected mercy once received, they could expect little compassion when captured again. Others were spared through youth, obscurity, or usefulness. A boy serving aboard a pirate vessel might be viewed less harshly than an adult who commanded violence. A skilled pilot could provide valuable knowledge of hidden waters. A sailor who possessed information about larger targets might be retained as a witness. Disease, overcrowded prisons, lost paperwork, absent witnesses, and administrative confusion could also open paths no judge deliberately intended. Justice upon the maritime frontier was fierce, but it was never perfect. It depended upon weather, memory, favour, evidence, money, fear, and luck. One prisoner climbed the scaffold because a merchant recognised his face. Another returned home because no surviving witness could swear that he acted willingly. One man died because he held loyalty sacred and refused to betray a captain. Another lived because he spoke quickly and gave officials the names they wanted. One pirate rejected a pardon and vanished into the blue distance. Another accepted it, stood trembling before a governor, and walked away carrying a freedom he had not expected to feel again. In a small harbour at evening, a former pirate may have sat alone outside a quiet house, hearing waves fold softly against the stones. His hands still carried old scars from rope and blade. At times, a sail appearing upon the horizon may have awakened the instinct to watch, judge speed, measure danger, and imagine pursuit. No gibbet held his body. No crowd witnessed his death. The law had permitted him to continue breathing. Yet survival had its own ghosts. He knew the names of men who had not been spared. He remembered their laughter, their arguments, their fear, their empty places upon a deck. He understood that one altered testimony, one missing witness, one rejected surrender, or one turn of fortune might have placed him among the condemned. For the pirate who escaped the rope, every peaceful dawn was shadowed by the truth that justice had passed near enough for him to feel its breath. The sea had not changed, but the balance of fear upon it had begun to turn. The same warm current still moved between the Caribbean islands. The same hidden anchorages lay beneath green headlands, sheltered from the violence of open water. The same trade winds filled sails and carried merchant vessels along profitable routes. At sunset, harbours still glowed with lantern light. Voices, music, argument, and the smell of tar, fish, wood smoke, and spilled drink. Yet for the pirate crews who had once moved through these waters with growing confidence, a new unease entered every horizon. Warships were coming, not merely an isolated vessel sent too late in response to an attack, nor a reluctant patrol easily avoided by sailing elsewhere. Naval power began to press more deliberately against the places where pirates lived, repaired their ships, traded captured cargo, recruited men, and convinced themselves that official authority remained distant. The response was no longer improvised outrage. It was becoming a sustained campaign. Pirates had always depended upon space. Their greatest ally was the enormity of the sea, the countless coves, channels, reefs, islands, muddy river mouths, and loosely governed settlements through which a hunted vessel might pass. Their survival required time to vanish, friends willing to supply them, merchants willing to purchase stolen goods, and officials too weak, too corrupt, or too indifferent to intervene. When those supports began to collapse, a pirate ship became far more vulnerable than its reputation suggested. A vessel could carry guns, but it could not remain forever at sea. Water spoiled, food diminished, powder became damp, hulls gathered weed and damage below the waterline, sails tore, rigging frayed, wounds became infected, men quarrelled, drank, deserted, or demanded their share of treasure. Every pirate captain, however feared, needed a shore where barrels might be filled, timber cut, stolen cargo sold, and exhausted sailors persuaded to venture out again. Authority began targeting those shores. The Bahamas had offered one of the most valuable refuges in the pirate world. The harbour at Nassau drew men who had abandoned lawful service and hoped to thrive in a community where captured goods, armed vessels, loose discipline, and defiance of distant rule mingled freely beneath the tropical sun. It was not a mighty republic in the formal sense, nor an orderly pirate kingdom. It was a dangerous opening in imperial control, and allowed raiders to rest close to the shipping routes they preyed upon. Such a place could not be tolerated indefinitely. A new royal governor, Woodes Rogers, arrived at Nassau in the year 1718 with authority, armed support, and a policy sharpened by both threat and mercy. Pirates willing to abandon their trade could seek pardon. Those refusing submission would face pursuit and punishment. This was a careful weapon. It did not simply demand obedience from an entire outlaw population. It forced each man to consider whether his companions were still willing to risk everything beside him. The effect was corrosive. A captain might gather his crew and find that half no longer desired battle. Some had grown older. Some had hidden enough money to dream of another life. Some had begun to fear that every friendly harbour would soon contain officials waiting with chains. Some had heard of executed men whose bodies remained exposed above shipping waters. Others simply understood that the great season of opportunity was fading. A pirate crew required trust. The pardon offered every man a reason to abandon it. Those who accepted official mercy stepped ashore under suspicious eyes. Those who rejected it sailed into a narrower world. Once a harbour that had provided shelter declared against them, they needed to travel farther for provisions, accept greater risks in trading, and approach unfamiliar shores where betrayal might bring reward. The pirate who had once boasted that no ruler governed his deck discovered that survival depended deeply upon the actions of governors. At sea, the hunters had also adapted. Naval officers understood that pirate vessels often favoured speed, surprise, and shallow water. Warships and smaller armed craft could be directed towards likely haunts, shipping passages, watering places, and island channels. Intelligence gathered from surrendered men, captured vessels, frightened merchants, and colonial officials helped turn vast water into a chart of probable danger. A sailor spared through pardon might provide knowledge more damaging than a broadside. He could name a hiding place, describe a captain's habits, recall a vessel's condition, or reveal where plunder was commonly exchanged. Pirates had once lived through information carried quietly along waterfronts. Now information hunted them. The capture and death of notorious captains deepened the transformation. Some pirate leaders died fighting, believing that surrender offered only chains and public disgrace. Others were taken alive, confined, examined, and condemned. Each defeat travelled through port communities in a cloud of rumour. Men who had once seemed almost mythical were shown to be mortal. Their vessels could be boarded, their crews could scatter, their heads could be displayed. Their names could pass from the frightened admiration of tavern talk into the cold language of legal sentence. One of the most feared figures of the age, Edward Teach, remembered widely as Blackbeard, met his end in violent combat off the coast of North Carolina in the year 1718. His carefully cultivated appearance, with smoke curling about his face in battle and weapons hanging across his body, had helped magnify fear among intended victims. Terror had been part of his armour. Yet when armed opponents reached him upon the deck, reputation could not stop blade, shot, or blood loss. His severed head was carried as proof that a figure who seemed to embody the wildness of piracy could be defeated and exhibited by authority. Other pirate crews saw the meaning plainly. Their enemies were not merely protecting ships, they were destroying symbols. The ports also grew less welcoming. A tavern keeper, boat owner, trader, or colonial official who had once benefited quietly from pirate money now had stronger reasons to hesitate. When governments committed themselves to suppression, association with raiders could bring investigation, property loss, prison, or public shame. The stolen goods that once passed cheaply into local markets became dangerous to touch. Without buyers, treasure became burden. A hold full of captured cloth or sugar was of little use if landing it exposed the crew to betrayal. Commerce, which piracy had fed upon, began withdrawing the hidden cooperation pirates required. There remained bold men upon the sea, there remained attacks, escapes, last stands, and crews determined to test whether the net truly held. No age ends cleanly upon a single morning. Waves do not cease because a proclamation has been read aloud. The ocean continued to offer hiding places, and human desperation continued to produce violence. But the great concentration of piracy that had alarmed the Atlantic world was losing its foundations. The pirate vessel had once seemed a floating challenge to hierarchy, a place where men rejected ordinary discipline and took wealth by force from the mighty currents of trade. Yet it had always relied upon conditions that could not last forever, wars that trained raiders, harbours without firm government, officials willing to look away, thin naval protection, merchants ready to buy stolen goods, and sailors willing to risk the rope for the possibility of sudden fortune. As those conditions narrowed, the sea grew colder for the outlaw. Picture a small pirate vessel moving beneath a moonless sky. Its provisions are low, its sail is patched, several crewmen have deserted, a familiar anchorage is no longer safe. Another port has welcomed a governor and soldiers, a captured sailor has spoken too freely. Somewhere beyond the darkness, a naval vessel is searching with orders that leave little doubt as to what will happen when the two ships meet. The men aboard speak quietly now. No one laughs about treasure. No one boasts of easy prizes. Each sound upon the water seems like a pursuing hull. Each distant sail becomes a question. The Empire had learned that it didn't need to command every mile of ocean. It needed to make shelter scarce, surrender tempting, captured leaders visible, and punishment swift enough to travel as a story from ship to ship. The waves remained boundless. The pirates' world had become very small. The river keeps no permanent monument upon its surface. Water closes over the wake of every ship. Mud receives the falling fragments of wharves, pilings, broken chains, discarded rope, and the innumerable objects lost by generations who worked beside the tide. London has expanded, rebuilt, brightened, and changed its face many times. The riverbank where condemned pirates once met the law no longer presents itself with the stark simplicity of timber, guards, prayer, and a waiting crowd. Yet places of punishment do not disappear entirely when the scaffold is removed. They endure in names whispered across centuries, in court papers stored carefully from damp and fire, in printed confessions folded into collections, in legal language written by clerks whose ink outlived the bodies they described. They endure in the human imagination, where a fog-bound river, a distant mast, or the faint creak of rope can summon a world of condemned sailors standing beneath the authority of a government determined to be feared. Pirates have always invited reinvention. In popular memory, they often appear in a golden haze of reckless liberty. Their ships carry overflowing chests, colourful flags, mysterious maps, secret islands, daring escapes, and captains whose wickedness is softened by charm. The rough deck becomes a stage for adventure. The ocean becomes an endless promise. Even death is sometimes transformed into a dramatic flourish. A fitting conclusion for a life spent beyond ordinary rules. The The surviving records offer a harsher inheritance. They present men whose bodies were marked by labour, disease, injury, hunger, violence, and confinement. They present merchant crews terrified by sudden attack, passengers robbed or abused, communities anxious for ships that failed to return, and sailors drawn towards crime through hardship, opportunity, resentment, or greed. They present courts struggling, and sometimes rushing, to impose order upon offences committed beyond the easy reach of land. They present executions made visible because rulers understood that fear could travel farther than any single warship. The pirate of legend laughs into the wind. The pirate of history often coughs in a prison cell, uncertain whether a witness will remember him as a captive, an accomplice, or a killer. To approach these lives with seriousness is not to excuse cruelty. Piracy could be savage. A captured crew might endure terror at the hands of armed strangers, interested only in wealth and obedience. Resistance could end in blood. Coastal inhabitants could see hard-won goods removed by men who left ruin behind them. Some pirate captains cultivated fear deliberately because frightened victims surrendered faster than brave ones. Yet seriousness also asks us to look clearly at the society that condemned them. The states opposing piracy were not gentle guardians of the peaceful ocean. They were commercial empires pursuing wealth across immense distances, often through conquest, forced labour, war, and the trafficking of enslaved human beings. They declared some violence lawful when it served royal interest, then displayed other violence as monstrous when it threatened revenue and command. A pirate hanged beside the water may have been guilty. The world that killed him was not innocent. Perhaps this is why the subject continues to disturb us. Pirate execution exposes the uneasy bond between justice and spectacle. It reminds us that punishment can protect the vulnerable, while also serving the powerful. It reveals how easily a crowd may be invited to confuse suffering with order, and how quickly fear can make speed seem more desirable than careful judgment. The officials who arranged public deaths believed visibility made the sea safer. They may have been correct in a narrow and practical sense. When bodies were raised as warnings, when captains were hunted and crews divided, when harbour communities were forced to choose between profit and obedience, the age of openly flourishing Atlantic piracy diminished. But a question remains, carried quietly within every record of a condemned sailor. What is lost when justice must display its power through the destruction of the body? There are moments in history when a society speaks most honestly through the punishments it chooses. The scaffold reveals its fears, the prison reveals its hierarchies, the public crowd reveals its appetite, its anger, its vulnerability, and sometimes its compassion. At a pirate execution, all these forces met beside moving water. Commerce demanded safety, government demanded authority, religion demanded repentance, the crowd demanded a sight worth remembering, the condemned man. Caught within these demands, possessed only his final breath and whatever truth he could still carry silently within himself. His voice is difficult to recover. Court records describe actions, accusations, verdicts, and property. Printed speeches may claim to preserve repentance or warning. Officials wrote what mattered to officials. Merchants preserved what concerned loss. Ministers preserved what served moral instruction. Rarely does the ordinary sailor step clearly from the page and speak without another hand arranging his words. So we search for him among fragments, a name in a list of prisoners, an age recorded inaccurately by a clerk, a place of birth, a description of a wound, a testimony that he held a musket, repaired a sail, begged for mercy, accepted a pardon, denied a charge, or remained silent when sentence was passed. From these small remnants, a human outline slowly emerges. He was not a symbol while he lived. He felt cold. He grew tired. He had memories. He knew the particular colour of dawn at sea, the taste of stale water in a cask, the warmth of sunlight upon wet deck boards, the sound of voices singing in a harbour at night. Somewhere, someone may once have expected him to return, and somewhere, When he didn't return, a story ended without explanation. The sea does this to history. It preserves and conceals in equal measure. Archaeologists may recover anchors, cannon, hull timbers, bottles, buckles, coins, and weapons from wreck sites buried beneath sand and silt. Conservators may arrest the corrosion of iron raised from salt water. Historians may compare trial documents, naval correspondence, harbour registers, and printed accounts, searching for the movements of ships and the truth behind famous names. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. The final thoughts of the condemned cannot be excavated from tidal mud. No ledger records the last image appearing in a sailor's mind as the gathered crowd faded from meaning. No preserved iron chain can tell us whether its prisoner died terrified, defiant, penitent, bewildered, or simply exhausted beyond emotion. The river carries those answers away. Tonight, beyond the windows of sleeping houses, seas continue to move beneath moonlight. Modern ships cross the ocean with lights glowing along their decks, guided by instruments unimaginable to the sailors whose lives once depended upon canvas, compass, courage, and chance. The age of pirate gallows has receded into the darkness, but its questions have not receded with it. Who receives mercy? Who is made into an example? Whose violence is condemned, and whose violence is called necessary? Along the old riverbank, the scaffold is gone, the ropes have decayed, the chained bodies have fallen from their posts and vanished into burial, river mud, or memory. Yet the silence they left behind remains strangely full. Listen closely, and it seems to contain the wash of a tide beneath timber steps, the low murmur of a waiting crowd, and the distant sorrow of men who sought freedom upon the ocean, only to discover that even the widest sea could lead at last to a narrow place of judgment. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made, and what forgotten voices may yet rise from the deep waters of the past.